welcome everybody. I'm here today for a series of videos that are basically going to try and teach you, in my opinion, the design and technology syllabus for the preliminary course, and then eventually I'll get around to doing the HSC course. I've only got a year 11 class this year. Design and technology is interesting compared to a lot of the other TAS subjects because it's very open and broad. So when you look at the syllabus, it can seem really simple. So there is some difficulty to it, and there is also, I'm sure a lot of differences between the way that teachers teach the actual content to you as a student. And I can only bring my experience into that. So I was a designer for 6 or 7 years before I was a teacher, so I worked in the industry. So a lot of the examples that I give are based on the things that I did as a graphic and industrial designer. So hopefully you can take some of that in, but obviously you need to use your own experience and the experiences of anybody else that's teaching you to work out if this is relevant as a series of videos for you. But this will cover all of the sort of syllabus outcomes, and I've tried to chunk it into ways that make sense to me. The ones that are covered by prac, I'm not really going to talk about too much because you would be working on those through your own design projects. But I'll briefly do them. I'm going to try and keep these videos fairly short though. Okay, so I'll jump straight into the first part of the syllabus, which is based on design theory and practice. So this whole section here is, to me, about that idea that a designer and design itself can be a hard thing to define. So what we're talking about when we're talking about a designer is a business professional, someone who has a job where the majority of their work is solving the problem. So when you solve a problem, you use either a product, a system, or an environment. So a product is something usually that you can hold in your hands that you make and buy. A system is a set of rules, and an environment is like a room or a place that people would be within. It doesn't need to be a room, it's just, it's a physical space. So you can have a combination of all three of those in a design solution. You can have one or the other two in varying degrees. It doesn't really matter. But the majority of your job is working to solve a problem from a client. So you could be creating it for yourself as a designer, but a lot of the time in the profession, there is an external client that will have a problem that you need to solve, and you as a designer will need to go and solve that problem. Now, the difference in high school is often we set a problem ourselves. So startup companies might do that where they are their own client, but they have an end view to create something. So inventors, all the tech people, but a lot of the time if you work in-house at a design agency, an advertising firm or something like that, a company will come to you, they'll have an idea of what they want as a solution and some external ideas and framework, and then your job as the designer will be to work within that framework and to solve that problem. So we balance the ideas of aesthetics, so the way things look, quality, what's required, budget, and our ethics, so what we want to work with. We also work with the client's areas that are important to them. So they may have some kind of cultural or ethical constraint that they might put on us, or things that we as a person just think are the right thing to do. So the interesting thing about design and design in the 21st century is a lot of changes are happening really fast and exponentially fast. So, there's been, I would say, more changes in the last 20 years in our world than there was in the prior sort of 50 years, when you think about the fact that, every sort of month there's something brand new and things are moving faster and moving quicker. There is an opportunity for designers to really place a stamp on their work with things that are positive for the future. So especially in terms of environmental things, social change, and all of those problem-solving ideas that are valued in society. So we have the opportunity as designers to make the world a better place. But, when I say who is a designer, my takeaway would be it's someone that solves problems for a client. It's a design solution. It makes something better. So if your design isn't making something better, unless the design is to actively make something worse to discourage someone from doing something, then you're not really designing effectively. And there's stakeholders and there's things in play that can make that different. Depending on what the client wants. If something is cheaper, is it better? Potentially. But it may also be worse quality. So you've got those varying factors affecting design, which we'll talk about later. And the emphasis on those changes depending on what the client wants. Your time, your budget, all those sorts of things. So the next thing that I need to talk about is the range of design professions. And I think the first thing that you need to take away from this is it's flexible, it's changing, and people don't have to do just one thing anymore. So when the syllabus was written, the assumption was, there was a range of professions, and there was a little bit of movement in between them, but you had a defined position. And yes, that does still exist in industry today, but the true valuable employees as designers are those that can do lots of different things. So taking you through some different professions, the first and easiest one for me is to do with graphic design. Graphic design is pretty obvious because it's to do with graphics, which is images. If you're a graphic designer, you could work in print, you could work in animation, you could work in live action, but what you put out is audiovisual material, usually, so multimedia. You might be doing publishing, web design, printing. You may be, working in the VR and AR space as well these days. But basically, you're taking mock-ups, symbols, images, and you're moving through that to a final outcome, which is, either paper-based or multimedia-based. So that's different from an industrial designer where usually you're making some sort of product and prototype and that sort of thing. So an industrial designer prepares products for manufacture. So when I worked as an industrial designer, I worked for a microphone company. So as industrial design, we would look at the different sort of microphones that the different parts you would make for different applications. You would be looking at much more machine and engineering parts. There's like a definite aesthetic importance with that, but it has to work. So with graphic design, aesthetics is paramount because it's basically all that you have. With industrial design, there's that mix between all of those engineering features and then the aesthetics of what you want to make something beautiful, but also something very functional. So there's a lot of model making with that. Assembly and manufacturing, you need to make things that will physically work at the end of it. You've got architecture, so you could work with interior architecture, so interior design, which is the interiors of buildings, and spaces and environments. So you're working with finishes and efficiency of environmental materials within a space, comfort, colors, fabrics, all of those sorts of things to produce an environment that may be comfortable, may not be comfortable. So, some of the things like using pastels in prison because they have been shown to stop aggression in people. Little things like that can really change things. Glazing in windows, all of those sort of interior things that you can change to make a space fit for the client's use. So not necessarily a beautiful place, although that may be part of it, but something that fits. So you could be like shop fitting, as an example, purely for efficiency, or you could be working within films on set design. So anything that involves building interior spaces. So I've done industrial, I've done graphic designers, I've done interior. You've also got a standard architect, which is someone that works with buildings and designing buildings. But you can be a textile designer, so someone that works in fabric, someone that works in fashion. So that can involve from the actual initial design of the fabrics. So you could be a textile designer that works on motorcycle jackets. It's not necessarily just high fashion based. You're working with textiles to make something that is functional, beautiful, to address a specific need. Then you've got from textile designer into fashion designer, which is where you develop those clothes and accessories. Hopefully I don't need to explain fashion designer too much to you. It is someone that works with wearable apparel. So someone that creates something that is then worn by something or someone. There's lots of different sort of sub things. So, if you're an interior designer, you may work overall on a building, but you may choose to just work on particular pieces, and then you'd be a furniture designer. You could be a web designer as opposed to just a graphic designer, so you can specify, but it all kind of like interacts within each other, because designers very rarely work on their own. They usually work in a design team. So you can work by yourself, that's perfectly fine as a designer, but a lot of the time you will work with another group of people. So how you do that and how you work is essentially up to you and what you'd like to do within the industry. So you can work on your own, which is what's known as a freelancer. So a freelancer kind of sets their own hours. They work on contracts with other design teams or clients. They if you're a freelancer, you tend to be a sole trader in Australia, although you could be a freelancer as part of a design agency. You use your prior work to get new work, word of mouth, and you're basically putting yourself up against your skill. You set your own hours. So there's positives and negatives to freelancing. You have to be really well organized to be a freelancer, because often you get paid through invoicing people. You need to keep track of money. You need to pay your own liability insurance. You need to pay taxes yourself. All of those sorts of things that get taken care of by like a HR department or someone that works in the finances of a larger agency. But it can be, you can have freedom. So you can choose to take on extra work when you need it, or not take on extra work at, whatever your life needs for you. And it can be a really rewarding thing to do, because it can be different and you can choose exactly what you want. If you're part of a design team, then you'll take on a few less of those responsibilities of having to take care of everything. But then, of course, there are issues that can arise with that. So if you're part of a design team, when I was a design team, if I was a junior designer, there'd be maybe a midweight designer and then, a head designer or a creative director that sits above me. So the creative director would meet with clients. I wouldn't meet those clients. I would never talk to them. I would never show them my designs. So I would create my designs based on what the creative director told me the client wanted. They would write me a design brief, and then I would look at that brief and I'd sit on my computer and I would draw and design away. And then it was liked or it wasn't liked. I would produce maybe 30 versions of something, and then that would go up the chain. It would be approved. Harder jobs would go to the midweight designer. Easy, not boring, but like simple stuff would come to me. And then you work your way up, and it's all that sort of stuff. But it gets divided by a team. The team works together, they negotiate. I would come up with my ideas, someone else would come up with their ideas, we would combine them together, see what works, see what didn't. So, it's designed by committee. When that happens, there's good things about it, there's bad things about it. It's basically a job that's group work. So you already know whether you like group work or not, and the answer is that most high school students absolutely hate group work. So all of those things that make you like or dislike group work continue in the design industry. So, somebody doesn't listen to your ideas, someone pushes their agenda too much. All of those things can truly happen in design, in the industry, and it's fine. But we have layers and hierarchies and importance with that, and that's totally fine. People are researching. Basically, design is just a group project. It's a lot like a school project in the industry. You have a client, so the client is an external person. It's not a teacher who sets an arbitrary project. You have a client that says they want something, you work, you do your research, you look into different materials, but instead of a due date that's set based on exams, it's a due date set on budget and whatever the client wants. So if they give you a turnaround time of a week, can I do it? Can I not do it? What I do is based on external factors, and it's kind of the chief designer or the creative director or whatever they're called that will set what is done and able to be done during that time, and then they pass it on to me. So I think that's like enough about design teams. If I was writing about it in an essay, I would honestly think about the design projects that I've done in the past as an individual, and I would also think about how I would have done them with group work. So it does carry on. The way that the course is run is a lot like the industry. So what works in the classroom, the same things can definitely be extrapolated to the design industry. It doesn't take a lot to do. The other thing that I need to talk about in this video is Australian and international designers and their work. So my recommendation to you is that you create your own case studies. So you go and look out into a project in your design projects, you have to do 2 in year 11. Make sure that in your research, if you're not being asked to do a case study, do a case study report on a designer from Australia and a designer from an international place. So I know in my school currently we're doing a children's toy, and so the students need to look up a children's toy from an Australian maker and a children's toy from an international maker, and then they do a case study report on how they work. So you can go into a lot of detail about them in terms of sort of educational qualifications. You can talk about inspiration, advice to others by actually going out and interviewing the person, but realistically you want to know how this person works. So in the syllabus, I've got it in front of me, when we talk about Australian international designers and their work, you are just being asked to investigate one designer and identify a range of career opportunities. So if you're identifying one designer, make sure they work both in Australia and internationally, but you're just looking at how they work. So how does this tie into anything rather than just being busy work? Well, you're looking for an example that you can put in essays. You're looking for an example that will help you to answer those short answer questions. And you're looking at justification on the process. So I've told you in my experience how Thomas Masters, the designer, worked when I worked in the industry. But if you have another example that's connected to a product or an environment or whatever it is that you're doing, you can then use that in any essay that's asking you about the design process. So it's asking, how someone deals with a design brief. So when you're talking about that, it would be perfect to go, as an example of how someone works with a design brief, this particular person at this company works in this way. So those are your examples. Like how in English you have your quotes. For me, these designers and these case study reports or whatever it is that you're doing function in that. Now you're going to do another case study in year 12. So this is kind of more of an introduction to that sort of thing. You do it however you need to do it, however your teacher wants to do it, but keep in mind that what you're looking to get out of this is examples that you can carry across into other essays in the future. So I think honestly that covers everything I need to talk about in terms of just an introduction to what design and tech is, the roles in the industry, and just a basic thing. So thank you for watching.